you investigated this matter yourself. How long ago did you do that, and why?
I commissioned the first book on the case, which was Ben and Olivia, What Really Happened, and that was co-written by myself and Jason Rhodes, a TV3 reporter, who covered the trial in 1999. That book, because the Watson family wouldn't give us their file at the time, after the trial, that book was written entirely on the basis of what was presented in court in 1999. And on the strength of that, I felt there was enough reasonable doubt that there was confusion in the witness descriptions and everything else in 1999 that the conviction was unsafe. And you also had this elephant in the room of everyone saying, well, there was a catch there, and the police saying, no, there wasn't. So the first book that I did, and Keith Hunter incidentally paid tribute to it in his book Trial by Trickery, was a book that said that the conviction against Watson was unsafe.
Yep. And so why did you then reinvestigate the issue after you'd come to that conclusion in 1999?
I resisted reinvestigating that issue for over a decade. I was contacted in the mid-2000s by a woman who had been assisting author Mike Kelleher with his research on the case. And she had obtained on digital file the entire defence police case that the Watson lawyers had. So the court trial documents, the whole 9 yards. And she said to me, you've got to read this because there's more information in here than there's ever been reported. And I said, well, I've already done my part. I don't see a need to revisit it. I think the conviction's unsafe. And she said, well, it might be, but you still need to read this file. And it wasn't until 2015 that I finally caved in and accepted it. And when I read it, my stomach dropped because the difference between the court testimony in 1999 and the original witness testimony taken on day 2, day 3 of the investigation was stark. And the story that it told was that essentially Watson was guilty.
What were the particular testimony that was originally got that led you to that conclusion? What were the particular witness statements or evidence that led you there, Ian?
The first thing that jumps out at you in reading the original police file is the evolution of the police statements over the days and weeks of the investigation as they went back and forth to witnesses saying and trying to cross-corroborate what other witnesses are saying and spark people's memories. But you had a series of interviews that police did basically from about the 2nd, 3rd of January, within 48 hours of the couple going missing, and lasting for that first week, where they basically interviewed every single Purno party goer they could and said, who did you see there and what were they doing? And at the stage they were doing that, they didn't have an agenda in terms of who they wanted to convict. It was an intelligence gathering exercise. So they were collecting information on catches, on suspicious characters, everything that they could find. And they were just chucking it all into the melting pot. And when you looked at these documents, you started to see one description emerge. Basically a guy, 5'8" to 5'9", tattoos on his arms, a couple of days of unshaved stubble on his face, wavy hair, might be down to his collar, wiry build, said he was a boat builder, he built his own boat and sailed it to Furno, and he was the key character in a lot of descriptions of the mystery man, and including in Guy Wallace's accounts. So when you put all these things together, it was very easy to start building a picture that, hang on, all the 1999 descriptions of Mystery Man had been spun beyond belief for the court trial. And there was confusion that set in with the witnesses after a year and a half of waiting to get evidence. But the original statements were fresh and clean. They were untainted by memory issues. and they provided a clear trail, in my view, to Scott Watson.
So was Scott Watson the mystery man or not?
Yeah, he was.
Did he fit that description of being unshaven and unkempt?
He did. Even his own brother described him as that on January the 3rd. And Scott Watson first appeared after the New Year. So when Tom Watson met Scott on the 3rd of January, when Scott officially sailed back to Picton, Tom told police that his brother needed a haircut, basically. That he was unshaved and unkempt, and that he was glad to see him. So
the photo that we see, and that is also part of the defence case of a man in a mid-blink and him without a blink, of a shaven-headed man who seems to be relatively kempt. Was that not taken on the night? Was that taken later?
That was taken when Scott Watson got back to Picton. And Scott Watson actually went and got a haircut before that photo was taken. There's a witness statement in the police file where a mate of Watson's who caught up with him on the 3rd or 4th of January told police, I saw him walking down the street. He'd had a haircut since New Year. And he'd lopped off his dangling fringe, which was one of the key identifying features of the mystery man. And that's why his photo looks a bit different. His hair's been cut a bit. Not great, because it was an amateur job. He didn't go to a professional hairdresser. That would have made an evidence trail. But probably somebody in his family, cut his hair from.
Okay. The other issue that you raised, Ian, as I remember, is that Watson lied about his whereabouts in the 24 hours after New Year's Eve. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a very important point. And because it explains a lot of why the trial went off the rails. Essentially, the official story, the one that Watson gave police, and that police decided to lock into and try and hang him on regardless, Watson said, on the morning of New Year's Day, I left Furneaux at about 7 a.m. and I sailed to my mate Zappa's place in Erie Bay, where I stayed for the next 3 days, painting the boat and having a good time. And then I got back to Picton on the 3rd of January. That's his official story. What we know from the police file from the earlier statements is that, in fact, Scott Watson and his boat Blade didn't go to Erie Bay on January the 1st at all. It never went there until January the 2nd in the afternoon. So for 36 hours after the murders, Scott Watson was nowhere to be seen. But what we did find in the police files was 4 or 5 witness statements from other skippers, including one who knew Scott Watson personally, who all said, we saw Blade and Scott Watson sailing at high speed, the fastest the boat could go into its diesel motor, from Endeavour Inlet back down to Picton, not to Erie Bay, on the morning of January the 1st. And the question is, why did Scott Watson lie about where he was going? And where was he for that 36 hours?
Okay. Now, these witness statements that you've got, did the police present them as evidence to the original court trial?
No, they didn't. And the reason is that Scott Watson arranged an alibi with Zappa, the caretaker at Erie Bay. And Zappa and his 2 kids essentially told the police, yeah, Scott Watson turned up here. He spent 3 days here painting his boat. So the police didn't have an easy knock aside to that because Zappa was one of their witnesses. So they had to approach the case as if Scott Watson was telling the truth and Zappa was telling the truth about where it was. So the trial and the police prosecution became a real farce in my view because it wasn't based on fact. And
Are you saying Zappa lied?
He did, yeah. I in the book Elementary and Elementary 2, I published the full statements of Zappa and his 2 children about the arrival in Erie Bay. They made 3 different statements, each one changing the story when they realised the game was up. In their first statements, the 2 young children, one aged 13 and one aged 8, told police separately in different rooms that Scott Watson's boat had been painted blue all of a sudden when it first arrived at Erie Bay.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott Watson's boat at Furno Lodge had been coloured red. So between the time he left Furno on New Year's morning and he arrived at Erie Bay on whatever date he arrived there, the boat had been repainted already. He didn't need to do any repainting at Erie Bay because he'd done it.